Screencast 18.6, Predicting Chemical Spontaneity. Since one of the big predictors of the free energy equation is whether a reaction will be spontaneous or not, and since that answer depends on the sign of the free energy, we can predict various types of scenarios that are possible based on the enthalpic and the entropic component, delta H and delta S, at a given temperature, and consider whether the numbers actually don't matter. Consider whether this will be a spontaneous reaction or not, or process, depending on those signs. So here's the enthalpy, here's the entropy, and we can predict whether it's spontaneous. Now think for a second. It's not written down, but the formula for this process is delta G equals delta H minus T delta S. So if delta H is negative, then delta G is likely to be negative, but it'll get switched around for entropy since it's a negative value. So when enthalpy is negative, that favors spontaneity, and when delta S is positive, since it's being subtracted, that also favors spontaneity. So regardless of the value of these numbers, if you've got a negative delta H and a positive change in entropy, that reaction will always be spontaneous. Clearly the opposite must be true. And so you could not even have to know the values of these numbers to predict that this could never be a spontaneous process. But what about when the enthalpy is positive, change in entropy is also positive? Let's think about it for a second. Well, this is usually the big time player here, and that's not looking good for spontaneity. So I'd say unlikely, unless it could be overcome by the entropic component. Maybe it's getting way more random. Or, let's think about it a little deeper, it gets multiplied by temperature. So at a sufficient temperature, it should be able to overcome this. So we'll say rarely. It depends on T, and T better be pretty high for it to do that. And let's do the opposite case. Ooh, looks like it favors a spontaneous reaction. And this one looks like it doesn't. So as long as this is a minor component, you will get a pretty large, you will have a spontaneous reaction. And this usually is a minor component. So I'd say usually, and it depends on T, and the lower it is, the more likely it is a spontaneous process. This is Screencast 18.6.